When students first start sparring in a dojo, or when they're introduced to kumite in their karate journey, the biggest problem that I often find, or there's two problems, but the first problem is that they tend to not know what stance to have or how to hold their position, because of course from the very beginning they're learning static movements, in their ki-on, they're just working on these solid, grounded kind of positions, and then we're asking them to do free-flowing sparring or kumite. The second problem that I mentioned, and I won't address in this video, but is that they don't know what to do as such. It's sort of, because of that static training, they don't know how to flow, but that's for another time. So this video is going to cover that kumite guard, make sure that we understand how we should be sort of moving and standing in our guard or our fighting position in order to be able to freely move and deliver our attacks, and also to be able to defend from. So this video, I'm going to give you a basic stance in which you can work from. Once you've made that basic stance, you can then adapt it to yourself and the situation that you're in. So the first thing we want to take care of is our lower body. How are we standing? What is our stance? I like to take a traditional Zenkutsu Dachi, a forward-leaning front stance from here, and then from this position, shorten it slightly by drawing the back foot up and coming onto the ball of the foot. Okay, both feet should have pressure on the balls of the feet and not sort of sitting down on the heels where we are heavy on the feet like this. When you sit on the heels, we end up putting our weight back here. I want to be on the toes so I can press through my movement. So again, starting from the Zenkutsu Dachi, I'm shortening the stance slightly and getting onto the balls of the feet. And then I'm taking my weight from the front, more central. Okay, so where we was in a forward-leaning stance and the weight was more of that front leg, I've drawn the back foot up and I've sit the weight back into sort of a 50-50 position. So I can now shift back and shift forwards and be equally able to move in both directions. The next thing we need to do then is to think about where the hands are going to be. Okay, so a lot of people think the hands must be up here all the time. Or once we've set up our guard and our body is kind of in a natural kind of hammy position, not too far open and not too far closed, this way here, almost 45 degrees, slide on slightly so we give a smaller target to the opponent. I now need to think about where my hands are going. Now, if we think about our basic ki-on, again, if we're making Gyakuzuki, I want to reverse that Gyakuzuki halfway, or a little further than halfway. Now this is my basic Kamae position, okay? So the front hand can deal with oncoming attacks here, but also it's loaded up, ready for a correct Gyakuzuki in the way that we practice in our ki-on. It's no good practicing ki-on, from the hip and connecting the hip to our punches, to then suddenly have a guard like this where the punches come out like a hammer almost. Okay, so we need to have the punch almost half loaded, ready to go. So my guard is kind of this position here. The front hand is kind of the initial form of defense. That's where I've got most of my parrying happens. And the backhand then is set up, ready for that Gyakuzuki. The front hand is also set up for Kizamizuki there. And notice as I'm sending a punch, I'm also guarding with the opposite hand. Okay, so as I'm punching, I'm bringing the other hand into a guard, obviously to avoid any counter attack. But the basic position then is get the back foot facing the direction we want to be moving in, to the front, and the back hand loaded as if we're going to make a Gyakuzuki from that position there. So I can fire the hip and the punch together. Any other position, and I've got to drop that hand before I throw the punch. So one more time, the basic guard position will be here, ready to go. Now that we've got our guard set up and our stance set up, we're going to also think about our back foot. So the back foot wants to be facing in the direction I want to move. So generally, for myself as a rule, I always want my back foot facing in the direction I'm travelling or I'm attacking. And that could be, it can still be backwards, even if my foot is facing here, I want it on that same line, so going forward and back. This is the same as when I do my kata. So if I'm thinking about Heian Shodan, the first movement of Heian Shodan, I don't want to simply come this way and then turn into my stance. My initial movement is to set up first and then move into Zenkutsu Dachi this way. Okay, so kumite is no different. I want to do the same thing. I don't want to have my back foot facing out here and I'm kind of like bouncing up and down like this. I'm kind of very static there and I've got no movement. I want to be turned around this way so I can shift better. I've got a good drive from that back leg. I can drive from that back leg to make my attacks this way. Okay, I want to be here. I can also make backwards movements from there, no problem. When I'm like this, it's very hard to make a forwards movement because my legs and my quads and stuff are not set up in the correct position to generate enough force to go forwards. So I want to be here, my guard is there in that sort of loaded position, ready to go. Again, it's slightly free, we can have our hands in different kind of positions, but the base line of it is here, and then I'm pressing off that back leg. Pressing off the back leg or shifting back and forwards, driving for my attack. So by coming up onto the toes, I want to almost think of my feet like springs, so I'm always loaded and I can always move from here. I can be nice and relaxed and I can shift and move forward and back or wherever I need to move, offline. We can move in different positions and directions with ease. If I sit down too heavy on the stance, put the heels down, then it becomes very hard to sort of shift around. And of course I'm exaggerating there slightly, but my feelings to be on a spring, not bouncing, bouncing up and down, but more kind of engaged. So I'm here, like the feet are ready to move this way. Different alternatives we could have. We could have the backhand higher and the front hand lower, maybe inviting a Uraken sort of position. So we're guarding now this way. I would still maintain the same lower body position, but we could be now having a higher guard there and we can have the Uraken. Maybe more of a kicking sort of stance because the hands are not in an ideal position to be punching as such. Another one, of course, is as we come closer to our opponent, that's when our hands will come up higher. If we're in close range, the hands come up higher, the stance gets smaller, the knees come into more of a sanchin position, sanchin that we have in many styles of karate, to protect our groin, our lower body. Then we're working with closer range techniques, elbows and all these kind of things. So the guard does change depending on the situation. But if we have a good basic stance, first of all, that Kamae position, like I said, the Kumite guard, then we can then start working from there. So as I was saying earlier, the back foot and the back hand is loaded up correctly for Gatsuki. So we're in a guard this way. Here, my front hand again, like I said, is parrying. The back leg is connected, ready to drive through. The back hand is loaded in a good position in that we don't need to telegraph the punch so much. We don't have to get it to set up first. So people often say, why are we punching from the hip? We're not punching from the hip as such, we're punching from halfway from that point. The hip is a training exercise to get us through that line of the punch, but really we're set up here more so. So if I'm in the shomen position, like a natural stance, I come off, this is the guard position. Okay, so that's almost like an illusion. I've moved my position, but I'm still there, and I can drive that punch from that position. Okay, so this is where our kion and our basics, our fundamental movements and our kata comes into kumite. It is all one piece, and they all connect together. So drive through the hip, drive the punch, elbow, shoulder, to make the Gyakuzuki this way. If that video was useful to you, like, drop me a comment, and subscribe if you haven't done already. Check out the karate gi here, the Bokken shirt. I've got a link in my video description with a discount code to get 10% off. So if you're after a new karate gi, check it out.